Netflix just put out a new series called Jentry Chau versus the Underworld, and if you're curious about the show or already a big fan, we're going to break down the plot, as well as some of the deeper mythological elements, but we'll be sure to let you know when the real spoilers are coming for those who still might want to watch the series and are just looking to get an idea of the show's vibe. My name is Deepcut, welcome back to Cartoon Universe. Hit that subscribe button if you're new here, as we're constantly breaking down new cartoons and the weird trend of mythological symbolism that they all seem to have these days. Jentry Chau versus the Underworld is about the titular Jentry Chau, who's just turning 16 and trying to enjoy her high school life. The problem with that is Jentry has magical spiritual powers, which mostly manifests as a hard-to-control ability to shoot fire, but it's noted early on that her powers can grow well beyond that. This is a problem because certain spiritual entities would like that power for themselves, including Mr. Chang, a practitioner of dark Taoist magic who has made a deal with a Chinese entity called a Mogwai, something like an evil spirit or a demon. After being harassed by a demon on her birthday, Jentry's great aunt Flora takes her out of her boarding school in Korea and makes her come to her home in Texas, where she keeps all her ancient Chinese spirit weapons that can help her kill the demon that's after Jentry. Jentry is well aware of the spirit world, but has mostly tried to ignore it and keep her great aunt Gugu's magic potions and creams as far away from her social life as possible. However, because of Jentry's power and that Mogwai after her, Gugu says that she was only able to convince the demon to wait until Jentry's 16th birthday before killing her. So now Jentry has to move back in with her great aunt, who's been taking care of her from a very young age after her parents passed away, and try to reimagine her life in River Fork, Texas. The show is a very classic supernatural high school drama, with Jentry being the new girl at River Fork High School, a town she spent a few years in as a child before accidentally causing a fire with her powers that burnt down half the town. Jentry was able to try and forget about this while in boarding school in Korea, but now that she's back, she sees that the town has memorialized the fire as an important part of their local history, with an urban legend developing that it was actually a demonic child that started the fire. Early episodes are just about Jentry trying to make friends and have a social life, while keeping her powers under control and fighting the spiritual bad guys that Mr. Chang sends after her. In the first episode, Jentry is being chased by a little monster named Ed, who is obsessed with Edward Cullen from the Twilight Saga. And while his tiny form makes him seem silly, he also has a scary monster form that tries to chase Jentry around. He quickly becomes one of Jentry's friends, however, and yet another spiritual secret that she has to keep from all of the people at school. This includes Jentry's childhood friend and sometimes love interest, Michael, who also develops the power to see the future. So don't worry, it's not the kind of show where only the main character has powers and everyone else is a satellite. There's also her new friend Stella she meets on the first day of school, who is actually dating Michael at the start of the series, making for an immediate love triangle. Stella also develops an interest in Taoism, and by the end of the series becomes pretty masterful using the different Taoist charms and seals. Things get more complicated with Jentry, as she also has an on-again off-again thing with another boy named Kit, who, like Jentry Chau, is just starting at River Fork High. These two boys give Jentry two extremes, with Michael as her childhood friend representing her past and the town as a whole, which she of course has a lot of baggage with because she started a fire that burnt it down, including Michael's own home. Kit, meanwhile, represents the new, the entire world outside of the small town of River Fork and the new life she has built for herself at the boarding school in Korea, even if he isn't from there himself. The show gives very much earlier generation high school vibes, even with cell phones and social media existing in the show, and it's the kind of genre I'd call Mean Girls but with supernatural elements. The show is not for kids and has some blood and guts, but also isn't actually gory with its more cartoon aesthetic. Jentry herself doesn't just have trouble controlling her powers, but also the problem is very much built around her anxiety and stress. So high school itself already makes it hard for her to control her powers. The powers themselves also build on this anxiety because she knows just how destructive they can be from her childhood accident, and we see several more accidents in the show as she tries to learn to control her emotions. Additionally, the town is on high alert for fire-related incidents because of the accident 8 years ago, with there being constant warnings about fires and the danger of fires around the school, and the town essentially rebuilding itself because of tourism that the fire actually brought in, as well as the story of the demon who started it. The vice principal, Mr. Wheeler, is particularly paranoid and is constantly trying to make trouble for Jentry as he tries to unravel the mystery to this day, despite no one in the fire actually having died. It's a really fun premise for a show, not just because high school is such a universal premise, but because it takes the classic idea of high school feeling like hell and turns it literal within the show. While the show emphasizes the fun times that can be had at school, making friends and figuring yourself out. It also equates high school with hell itself by making it the place where Jentry is dealing with the forces of the underworld attacking her on the daily. It's a premise that was used for other shows too, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, with a school built right over a hellmouth that attracts demons and all sorts of monsters. And I'm glad to see that in this animated form with Jentry Chau. The show quickly evolves beyond just episodes about field trips and school dances, however, with the spiritual lore of the show and the actual plot surrounding Jentry's history and powers becoming increasingly complex. For those who still want to see the show, go check it out, because from here we'll be getting a lot more into the crazy twists and turns and of course the spoilers. Now, Jentry Chau herself was not born with the powers that she has, even though this is what her great aunt Flora claims early in the show. We later learn, however, that Flora has been keeping Jentry's origins a secret to protect herself and even Jentry's mother. It turns out that the powers that Jentry has were once held in the robe of the Yellow Emperor, a famous emperor from Chinese myth who was a foundational figure in Chinese history and mythology. These powers were beyond measure, with it giving godlike abilities to the right combination of people wielding it. These powers are sought by the Mogwai and his human host, Mr. Chang, who is referred to as a sort of dark warning for what Taoists can become when they try to use the powers for themselves. Mr. Chang lost his daughter when he was very young, and in an attempt to bring her back to life, he made a deal with a Mogwai that basically made him the bodily slave to the demonic spirit. This Mogwai is one of many that exists in the spiritual world, but after combining powers with Chang, he is considered a King Mogwai, one of the most powerful that there is. Flora first found the Emperor's robes with her sister Iris, who would be Jentry's grandmother, but she was too arrogant and the robes were too powerful. So when Flora tried to wield them and Iris tried to stop her, Flora just ended up causing the death of her own sister. At this point, Flora was already in her older age, with Iris being a mother herself, with Flora taking over and looking after the family as a whole from there. The problem is that being a Taoist doesn't pay great, and Jentry's mother and father had a hard time taking care of themselves and their newborn daughter. They would do dangerous illegal missions, including taking the scales of a dragon to sell on the black market, but the only one who made them a real offer would be Mr. Chang. Jentry's parents make a deal to steal the yellow robes for Mr. Chang, but Flora is so afraid of these powers in his hands that she ends up transferring them to inside of Jentry. With Mr. Chang having lost his own daughter, Flora believed that he would not want to kill Jentry to get the powers for himself, not wanting to inflict that same pain onto Jentry's mother and father. But instead, he ends up killing Jentry's father and taking the memories of Jentry's mother, and promises to come back and kill Jentry and take the powers for himself if Flora can't find another way to bring back his daughter by the time that Jentry is 16. The problem with trying to bring someone back to life is that it's dangerous, however, even with the Yellow Emperor's powers, and Flora instead wants to use the powers to finally defeat the Mogwai and King Chang. Through Flora herself, who dies early on in the series, we get to see what happens to the spirits in Chinese mythology, which explains why it's so dangerous to try and bring a spirit back to life. According to Ghost Flora in episode 4, souls have two choices after they die. They may stay behind as a ghost and watch over their family and loved ones, or they may choose to reincarnate. To reincarnate, you have to descend through DU, which in Chinese mythology is essentially a hell or purgatory, a place where you go to have some suffering, but only so that you can be purified and later return to life. However, some souls don't want to let go of their identities because they believe that they still need to help the people they met in their human life, particularly their family, and so they choose to stay behind as a family spirit. This reflects the real-life tradition found all over the world and dating back to ancient times of not just honoring the dead, but praying to them for help and guidance. As a ghost in the world of Jentry, you are able to influence the world, but most people are unable to see you. Instead, you can be a guiding whisper to those you love until you train yourself to have telekinesis, with which ghosts can move items around and get the attention of people even if you can't properly see or hear them. In greater mythology, this is supposed to be the story of how we eventually got the gods of the different pantheons, with each representing the history of their nation and being something of a combined force of family spirits that an entire nation has come to worship. This goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, where the kings would be initiated into royalty through a ceremony where they would reenact the death and spiritual resurrection of the god Osiris. In this ceremony, the initiate was believed to prepare themselves for an afterlife where they would work with Osiris himself, ruling over the dead and guiding the living. The problem with this in Jentry's world is that when these spirits are forgotten, they fade away into nothingness, which can be a real problem even if you become rather famous, as generations later people simply don't remember you or interact with your spirit in the same way through prayer. When this happens, the spirit becomes nothing, losing all sense of self and identity. immortality. This is a final death, a trade-off for being able to help others as a spirit, who themselves will tend to take the option to descend through DU and eventually reincarnate. But after choosing to be a ghost yourself, this option no longer exists for you. In the case of Mr. Chang, his daughter did not want to be a ghost, and instead was ready to move on through DU after her death. His daughter was so far along in this journey that when Chang does manage to get the Emperor's robe and bring her back to life, she sees this human life as suffering and pain, something she had already moved on from and wasn't meant to come back to. This ends with Jentry being able to get her powers back and separating Mr. Chang from the Mogwai, where he is able to accept that his daughter is happier where she is gone, and that he can one day catch up to her in his own spiritual journey if he allows himself to pass away. The King Mogwai, however, is not defeated, as Mr. Chang was just a vessel, and the Mogwai has his own plans. The Mogwai has very Luciferian elements to his character, tempting people with knowledge and power, with even claims that he can make you like a god if you take forbidden magics. This mirrors the story of the serpent in the Garden of Eden from the Christian Bible, who tempts Adam and Eve to eat the fruit of forbidden knowledge that he says will make them like gods. According to the greater Judeo-Christian lore, the point of this was for the serpent, or the Luciferian figure, to make himself the god of creation, with Satan being referred to in the New Testament as the king of the earth because he is able to mislead people against the worship of the one true God. The Mogwai wants the same thing, to use forbidden knowledge that he says will help others like Jentry become like gods, so that he can eventually rule all of creation, both the physical world and the spiritual. I have no doubt that he would keep his promises such as those made to Jentry's mother, but whoever makes a deal with him is ultimately just setting up the rest of the world to be in chaos, while they alone get their one desire or their own little safe space in the new hellish reality. After defeating Chang, the Mogwai gets taken back to DU to be punished, but he escapes and continues to mislead Jentry with the revelation that her mother is alive. Here, it's revealed that when Flora tried to give the powerless robes to Chang, he got mad because he of course wanted the powers that were now in Jentry. So he killed Jentry's father and then stole the memories of her mother in order to keep her a prisoner for his later plans. Here, he's thinking 8 years ahead, and it gives the impression that he has the ability to see the future somewhat, just like Jentry's friend Michael has. Michael himself seems to have visions that don't always come true, and they're based more so on possibilities, things that can happen based off of the choices people make around him. The Mogwai, I want to believe, has a similar gift even though it's not expressly stated in the show, as the way he plans certain things so far in advance seems to me that he knows that his plans can go wrong, but that certain backups will always be an option for him. Though in the end, this doesn't stop him from seeing his own eventual defeat. While the Mogwai ends up taking over Jentry's mother in order to try and trick her to get the powers, and then to be a vessel that Jentry herself would be afraid to attack, Jentry just ends up getting control of her powers and separating the Mogwai from her mother, using the powers to finally incinerate him into nothingness and leaving the door open for a potential second season. Everything with the main plot is perfectly wrapped up now, with Jentry beginning to integrate her different lives, her life in Korea with her life in Texas, and her life in the spiritual with her life in the physical reality. And with all of her friends basically just starting to get a handle on their powers, it seems obvious to me that this was all meant to set up a second and even more seasons later down the road, where Jentry Chau will continue to fight the powers of the Underworld with the help of her psychic friend Michael and her charm-wielding friend Stella. But what do you guys think? I found this to be a really interesting new show on Netflix, and I really hope this gets a multi-season treatment instead of just 2 or even just 3. But let me know your thoughts on this in the comments down below, and if you're curious about more mythology surrounding the Yellow Emperor, we also put out a video earlier this year on the new Lara Croft Tomb Raider show, which dives into a lot of different mythologies, including that of the Yellow Emperor. Or consider checking out our video we did on the other Netflix series Twilight of the Gods, which goes deep into Norse mythology. See you guys next time!